Will he reopen the hurting economy, or will he keep it locked? And there we see President Uhuru Kenyatta approaching the media at Harambee House. Let's cross over now once again and listen in to that much-awaited speech.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. A short statement. Fellow Kenyans, when I addressed you on the 6th of June of this year, the nation at that time was confronted with a dilemma of two rights over this COVID-19 crisis. The two dominant positions were whether to reopen our country or not. To remind you, we had one side of the divide that presented an economic argument. They wanted us to reopen the country and save the economy. Their argument was that COVID-19 was, yes, a health crisis, but it was also an economic crisis at its core. And if we take care of the economics of Corona, they argued, the health crisis will be easier to manage, more so with the necessary protocols in place. The other side, that was also right, tabled a very compelling case against reopening the country on the 6th of June. And this was largely made up of medical scientists and researchers. And this group of experts argued at the time that the country was not ready. Their modeling pointed to a soaring crisis if we reopened without the necessary health protocols. And according to them, a series of irreducible minimums had to be met before we could consider easing the containment measures that were in place. Indeed, after much reflection, my administration opted for the health argument over the economic argument, more so because we can always revive an ailing economy, but we cannot bring to life those who may die from this pandemic. And with this, we chose the path which is we set out working with our partners to build on these irreducible minimums. Many of you are aware that at the time we agreed and we had held two meetings, one in person and another one 2 weeks later that was virtual with the Council of Governors. You will also recall on the 6th that we instituted two teams, one composed of our interfaith brothers and sisters to consider issues around opening places of worship, and another consisting of education stakeholders to consider the issue of reopening our institutions of learning. The leadership of all these critical stakeholders have consulted on this path for the last month, and some of them are standing behind me today. And the question before us is the following: have we as a country met the irreducible minimum? Are we ready to reopen? According to experts and stakeholders, we have not yet met the irreducible minimum 100%. However, after further dialogue amongst them, we have reached a reasonable level of preparedness across the country. And I repeat again, we have not yet met 100%, but we have met a reasonable level of preparedness across our counties. With this expert opinion at hand, and the counsel offered by the National Security Council, I therefore today announce a phased reopening of the country as follows. 1, today I order and direct that the cessation of movement into and out of the Nairobi metropolitan area, Mombasa County, and Mandera County that is currently in force shall lapse today or at 4 a.m. tomorrow, Tuesday, the 7th of July, 2020. Number 2, I do order and direct that the nationwide curfew that is currently in force between the hours of 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. daily be and is hereby extended for a further 30 days. Fellow Kenyans, by reopening Nairobi, Mombasa, and Mandera, we must be cognizant of the fact that we are all much more at risk than we were when the restrictions were in place. So we must therefore exercise what I call cautious optimism and avoid reckless abandon. I believe that although the path to recovery is rocky and uneven, it is navigable. And that is why I must give 2 qualifications to this phased reopening. Firstly, the order to reopen is given conditionally. Should the situation deteriorate and pose a challenge to our health infrastructure, we will have to revert back to lockdown. In the next 21 days, we shall study patterns of interactions and the spread of the disease. Any trends that signal a worsening of the pandemic, we will have no choice but to return to lockdown at zero option. Secondly, fellow Kenyans, this order to partially reopen will only bear fruit if we recognize that this exercise is a shared responsibility. It is my intention that not only shall we reopen as we have done now, but we shall go further in our partial reopening as we go forward. However, I must also be clear that that shall be based on the behavior of each and every one of us individually. So therefore, fellow Kenyans, to reopen and to remain open, you must become your brother's keeper. You must become your sister's keeper. While the government will no doubt do its part to achieve this desired wish of remaining open, you, my fellow citizens, must also do what is expected of you personally in order for us to achieve it. This, therefore, is not just a call to reopen our country, but it is also a national call to civic responsibility. And on this, I must further add that civic responsibility is not a demand placed on self or on the individual by the state. It is not a demand that the state can enforce. It is therefore a duty that you individually owe your fellow countrymen for coexisting with them. It is a voluntary act of goodwill expressed to your neighbors in good times and in bad times. It is a civic duty to defend and protect yourself, your family, and the environment that nurtures you. My national call to you all, therefore, is to minimize unnecessary contact and movement. I encourage all Kenyans to consider delaying non-essential up-country travel. But again, that is voluntary. And I encourage you to exercise extreme caution and fidelity to the correct usage of face masks, hand washing, sanitizing, physical and social distancing, and also your individual concern for the health, especially of the elderly and those who have immune depressed systems, people who are much more susceptible to get a serious case of COVID-19. And you must always remember that there can be no unbearable responsibilities in the face of a crisis as we are in. Going further, and again with the advice of the National Security Council and the National Emergency Response Committee on the coronavirus pandemic, I also further order and direct the following phase measures. That places of worship will commence phased reopening for congregational worship and public, that is, individuals can attend worship in strict conformity with all applicable guidelines and protocols, including the self-regulating guidelines that have been developed by our friends of the Interfaith Council, protocols and guidelines that I have received from them today. And to mention but a few of the guidelines issued by the Interfaith Council, only a maximum of 100 participants will be allowed at each worship ceremony, which should not take more than an hour. That Sunday schools and madrasas shall continue to remain suspended until further notice, and in-person worship shall not include congregants under the age of 13 or above the age of 58, and shall neither include persons with underlying health conditions. These guidelines will be shared by the Interfaith Council with their colleagues across the country, and we have said that we need for our places of worship to open in a period that does not exceed 3 weeks after they have had the opportunity to fully engage with their colleagues across the country. Number 4, that following consultations with stakeholders in the education sector and cognizant of the surge in the rate of infections across the country, the Ministry of Education shall jointly with all the stakeholders in the sector today, but no later than tomorrow, notify the public on the resumption of the 2020 academic calendar for basic education as well as tertiary institutions. Number 5, that conscious that movement of people is in itself a catalyst for the spread of the disease, there shall be no movement of public transport vehicles into and out of areas previously under cessation of movement restrictions without the public transport providers being compliant with all protocols developed by the Ministry of Health. To operate public service vehicles, the operators will require mandatory certification from the Ministry of Health in consultation with the Ministry of Transport. Number 6, that local air travel within the territory of the Republic of Kenya shall resume effective Wednesday, the 15th of July, 2020, and again, in strict conformity with all applicable guidelines and protocols from both the Ministry of Health and our civil aviation authorities. Number 7, that international air travel into and out of the territory of the Republic of Kenya shall resume effective the 1st of August 2020, once again in strict conformity with all protocols from the Ministry of Health, local, as well as international civil aviation authorities, and any additional requirements applicable at the ports of departure, arrival, or transit. Number 8, that the prohibition against social and political gatherings of whatever nature is extended for a further period of 30 days. Number 9, that the restriction of the operation of bars to takeaway only and the restriction of the number of persons who can attend weddings and funerals is extended for the further period of 30 days. And 10, that the Ministry of Health, in conjunction with the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development, shall establish protocols for the resumption of the importation and sale of imported second-hand clothing. Fellow Kenyans, as we implement the phased reopening, I remain alive to the economic and social challenges facing our country. We know that jobs have been lost and some businesses have closed and many livelihoods endangered. And this, unfortunately, is the sorry state of affairs across the entire world. But history has taught us that the COVID crisis is not the first health disaster with such enormous economic challenges. There were many more before this one. However, we must all be cognizant that those who overcame previous disasters and finished on top did so by first changing their mindsets. Put differently, it is not enough for the government to pump resources into the economy using stimulus instruments, as we have been doing. Such efforts will undoubtedly go to waste if people do not co-create solutions with the government. Those who overcame previous disasters in history did so because they acted as one. The people and their government entered into a joint venture in order to conquer the challenges that they had. This therefore means that for us to revive the economy, reopen and remain open, the government and all citizens must pull together. Today, fellow Kenyans, I've invited you to exercise civic responsibility towards each other. But I do not want you to exercise this responsibility in the fight only against COVID-19. I want you also to have a shared responsibility with government in reviving our economy. And for us to do this, we must first, as I said before, change our national mindset. We have the opportunity to stitch a new national mindset and chart the future that is ahead of us. On June the 1st, Madaraka Day, I set the stage for the change in mindset. And I challenged all of us to reimagine Kenya the way our founding fathers imagined a nation from nothing. And today, we have a much younger population. And I challenge you and will support you to reimagine our economy, our business models as we reopen tomorrow. We must remember that the coronavirus is an invisible enemy. We cannot confront this enemy because we cannot see it. We can only evade it. And invading an invisible army and enemy calls for great imagination. Instead of doing business as usual, therefore, this is a moment that calls us to do business unusual. When we reopen, we cannot use the old maps to navigate the new lands created by this unfortunate moment. We must have the courage to let go of the old ways. We must, together, find new opportunities to face the challenges of tomorrow. Those who will change their mindset and embrace the new normal will be favored by destiny. And I once again particularly encourage our young people to take up this challenge of reimagining our business models, and in this, I promise you my support. We may not have all the capital we need, but the currency of this moment is ideas, and young Kenyans are a flora of ideas. I note, for example, our textile industry has already seized the moment and leveraged on the silver lining presented by the COVID crisis to create opportunities for our fellow countrymen. Owing to this initiative, Kenya is today emerging as a net exporter of PPEs in the region. I applaud the COVID-19 Response Fund for contracting the local industry to produce PPEs for our healthcare workers. And I encourage other sectors of our economy to also reimagine Kenya in this fashion. Turning to another problem, which will be my last point, I want us also to reflect on issues that are occurring on our social front. I am indeed concerned by the increased tensions within our homes. Cases of gender-based violence have increased, mental health issues worsened, and instances of teenage pregnancy have also escalated. I appeal to all our social institutions, including our religious institutions, to exercise civic responsibility to bring these unfortunate trends to an end. We must always remember that the family is a projection of the state. If the family is under attack, the state is under attack. If the family is weak, a nation is weak. So therefore, also to fortify our protection of the family as the foundation of the state, I also further direct and order the National Crime Research Center to probe 3 issues. First is the escalating cases of gender-based violence. The second is the worrying trend of cases where the girl child has been disempowered. And the third is the violation of children's rights. In that regard, the center is further directed to prepare an advisory to the security agents on remedial action within 30 days from the date of today and initiate immediate prosecution of all violators. Finally, fellow citizens, and as a fact of history, a crisis always has two elements. The first is danger. The second is opportunity. Success is always given to the persons who exploit the opportunities but also manages to evade the danger. And to exploit the opportunities given to us as we reopen, our mindset must be that of makers of things. We must remain positive, because a positive nation is a forward-moving nation. I want to thank all the stakeholders who have worked diligently for the last month to come to some consensus on the way forward. Na vile nimesema na ningependa nirudie tu tena, ni ya kwamba kulingana na mawazo na fikra zetu sisi wote, iwe ni serikali, iwe ni wakuu wa afya wa nchi yetu, iwe ni viongozi wa makanisa, iwe ni viongozi wa vyuo vyetu vya elimu, walimu na wazazi na wote, ni ya kwamba sasa na kutoka leo serikali itachukua jukumu lake. Hiyo hatutasita kufanya. Lakini kama tutafaulu kama nchi, tutafaulu kwa sababu kila mmoja wetu, mdogo ama mkubwa, mtoto hata mzee, mama ama baba, tutafaulu tukiwa kila mmoja wetu atachukua jukumu lake kibinafsi. Tusidanganyane hapa ya kwamba huu ugonjwa hatuko nao. Ugonjwa huko sana sana twasikia watu wakisema hii ugonjwa si ugonjwa wa kweli, kwa sababu mtu hajui, mtu sio kitu unaweza kushika ama kuona, na wengi ambao wanaopata wanapona, ni kweli. Lakini nataka niwaambie ya kwamba pia idadi ambao wanapata huu ugonjwa na wamelazwa katika mahospitali mbali katika taifa letu, idadi yao pia yaendelea kupanda. Kwa hivyo jukumu lazima iwe ni ya kila mtu. Tukiongea na viongozi wa makanisa, viongozi wa misikiti, tumekubaliana ya kwamba hawa pia wako na jukumu. Tuwataka wananchi wetu, tukiwa nchi ambayo tunamcha Mungu, tunataka warudi makanisani, tunataka warudi misikitini, tunataka warudi kuomba na kuombea taifa lao, familia zao na hawa wenyewe pia. Lakini tumekubaliana ya kwamba jukumu itakuwa lao. Hatuwezi kuwa na askari kwa kila kanisa, hatuwezi kuwa na maofisa wa afya katika kila msikiti. Viongozi wetu wa kidini lazima wachukue jukumu la kuhakikisha ya kwamba hata tukiomba Mungu wetu, tutafanya hiyo kwa njia ambayo haitahatarisha maisha ya wenzako. Kwa wale ambao watachukua nafasi hii kurudi manyumbani, tunasema pia hiyo ni sawa, lakini ujue warudi kwa nyanya, kwa babu, warudi kwa wazee wenu, warudi kwa familia yako. Jukumu silo la serikali kama wewe utawapelekea huo ugonjwa, na tunajua ya kwamba idadi ya wale wengi ambao wanaaga ni wale wazee. Sasa tumekupatia nafasi, waweza utoke Nairobi, uende Nyeri, uende Kakamega, uende Machakos, uende pahali popote, lakini ujue jukumu ni lako, na ile shida ambayo itatokea ujue wewe ndio umeipeleka. So mimi nawaomba Wakenya, vile tulikuja pamoja wakati wa jangwa la ukimwi na wakati maelfu na maelfu ya Wakenya waliaga kwa sababu ya ugonjwa wa ukimwi, mwishowe tuliweza kujisaidia kwa sababu kila mmoja alichukua jukumu lake. Hiyo ndio iliyokoa maisha, sio serikali. Serikali yaweza tu ikueleze hatari ambayo iko mbele yako, lakini hawawezi kuwa kwa nyumba yako, hawawezi kuwa katika kila kanisa, hawawezi wawe katika kila msikiti, hawawezi wakuwe katika kila soko. Ni wewe na mimi. Ombi langu kwa Wakenya wapenzi wenzangu, tunataka kuendelea kufungua, tunataka maisha yetu irudi, tuchukue hii nafasi ambaye serikali pamoja na viongozi wale ambao tuko nao hapa wametupatia, na tutende na tufanye yale ambaye yatatuwezesha sisi kama Wakenya kusonga mbele na kujiokoa kwa hii jangwa. Kwa hayo machache nirudie tena, asanteni sana kwa timu ya viongozi wa dini kiongozwa na Archbishop Muheria, kwa timu ambayo imefanya kazi upande wa elimu ikiongozwa na Profesa Makoha, na timu hizo zote mbili zitakuja mbele yenu kuambia matokeo ya mjadala ambao wamekuwa nao, na watupatie mwelekeo wa vile tutafungua makanisa na misikiti na mpangilio ambao tutafuata kuhakikisha watoto wetu wameweza kurudi kwa masomo yao, lakini kwa njia ambaye haitahatarisha maisha yao. Kwa hayo machache na mengi nasema Mungu awabariki, Mungu awalinde, and as we keep saying to each and every one of us, stay safe and recognize that the responsibility lies with you and me. God bless you all. Asanteni. Namna hiyo?